If you had 2 seconds to save a stranger's life, would you risk losing everything? The soft hum of conversation drifts through the restaurant, silverware tapping gently against porcelain, glasses catching the warm glow of dim chandeliers, every table dressed in crisp white linen like something out of a magazine, the kind of place where people close deals worth millions over a single meal, and Sophie Bennett knows she doesn't belong here, not really. Not in her worn black flats or the uniform she pressed an hour ago in a cramped apartment barely larger than a walk-in closet. But she keeps her head down, tray balanced carefully in her hands, because tonight's tips might mean the difference between making rent or sleeping in her car, and that thought alone is enough to steady her breathing as she weaves through the dining room, offering polite smiles that don't quite reach her tired eyes, until she reaches table 12, the VIP section, where the air feels different, heavier somehow, and sitting there is a man she's only ever seen in headlines. Ethan Caldwell, the kind of name people say with quiet respect, a billionaire CEO whose decisions ripple across entire industries, his tailored suit perfect, his posture relaxed but commanding, the kind of man who looks like he's never had to second-guess a single choice in his life, and for a moment Sophie hesitates, reminding herself he's just another guest, just another order to deliver, but as she sets the plate down in front of him, something catches her eye. Something small, almost invisible, a faint shimmer. In the sauce under the candlelight, just a flicker, gone as quickly as it appeared, and she freezes, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the tray, because she's seen that before, not here, not in a place like this, but years ago, in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and regret, when her father lay pale and still after a contaminated meal no one had questioned in time, and suddenly her heartbeat is louder than the music, louder than the voices around her, and Ethan reaches for his fork, casual, unaware, bringing it closer to the plate, and Sophie's mind races. Maybe she's wrong, maybe it's nothing, maybe it's just the light playing tricks on her, but what if it's not? What if she walks away and something happens? What if this moment is the one she regrets for the rest of her life? And without thinking, without asking, without permission, she moves, her hand darting forward as she lifts the plate away just inches before the fork touches it, the motion sharp enough to draw attention, conversations nearby faltering as heads turn, her breath catching as she realizes what she's just done, standing there in the center of a room that suddenly feels too quiet, too focused, every eye on her, the weight of a decision she can't take back pressing down all at once, and for the first time since she started this job, Sophie Bennett understands exactly how fast everything can change in a single heartbeat. For a moment, no one speaks, the entire room suspended in a strange, fragile silence as Sophie stands there holding the plate, her pulse racing so loudly she is sure everyone can hear it, and then the illusion shatters as the restaurant manager rushes forward, his polished smile gone, replaced by sharp irritation as he lowers his voice just enough to sound controlled but not enough to hide the anger, asking her what she thinks she is doing, and Sophie opens her mouth but no words come out. Because how do you explain a feeling, a flicker of instinct, in a place where everything is supposed to be precise and perfect, and before she can find anything to say, a few nearby guests begin whispering, their curiosity turning into quiet judgment, while Ethan Caldwell slowly sets his fork down, his gaze lifting to meet hers, calm but cold, the kind of look that measures people in seconds, and when he finally speaks, his voice is even, controlled, asking her if there is a problem with his meal, and Sophie feels every eye in the room pressing into her as she swallows, forcing herself to answer, saying softly that she just needs to replace the dish, but the manager cuts in immediately, apologizing to Ethan, assuring him this is a misunderstanding, a mistake that will be handled, and he reaches for the plate in Sophie's hands, but she does not let go, not yet. Something in her still holding on, even as doubt creeps in, even as she begins to question herself, wondering if she has just ruined everything over nothing. And then, just as the tension begins to shift back toward normal, a man at a nearby table laughs lightly and says he will take the untouched dish instead of waiting for his own order, brushing off the situation like it is a harmless inconvenience, and before anyone can stop him, the plate is set down in front of him, the moment slipping out of Sophie's control, and she feels her chest tighten as she watches, her fingers curling into her palms, her mind screaming that something is wrong even if she cannot prove it, and seconds stretch longer than they should, each one heavier than the last, until the man pauses mid-sentence, his expression faltering just slightly, his hand lowering back to the table as he shifts uncomfortably in his seat, confusion flickering across his face. And the room changes again, not with chaos but with a subtle, growing unease that spreads from table to table, like a ripple no one can quite name, and Sophie takes a step back, her breath catching, because she knows now, she knows she was not wrong, but that realization brings no relief, only a sharp, sinking fear as the manager turns on her completely, his voice no longer controlled as he demands to know what she did, accusing her of tampering, of causing a scene, of putting the restaurant at risk. And hands reach for her, not rough but firm, guiding her away as guests watch with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort, while Ethan remains seated, silent, his eyes following her with a new intensity, not anger, not yet, but something else, something calculating, as if he is replaying the moment in his mind, searching for answers she cannot give, and as Sophie is led toward the back hallway, the weight of what just happened crashes down on her all at once, the job she needed, the stability she was barely holding onto, slipping through her fingers in real time, all because she chose to act, all because she refused to ignore a feeling she could not explain, and for the first time, she wonders if doing the right thing is going to cost her everything. The back hallway feels colder than the dining room, the polished elegance replaced by harsh fluorescent lights and the faint smell of cleaning supplies, and Sophie stands there with her hands trembling at her sides as the manager paces in front of her, his voice low but sharp, asking the same question again and again, "What did you do to that plate?" And she keeps shaking her head, trying to explain that she only moved it, that she saw something off, something not right. But the words sound weak, even to her own ears, like excuses instead of truth, and the manager lets out a frustrated breath, running a hand through his hair as he tells her she has no proof, that instinct is not evidence, that she just disrupted a table that brings in more revenue in one night than she makes in a month, and the weight of that comparison lands heavy, pressing down on everything she already feels about her place in this world. But before she can respond, the door swings open again and a security staff member steps in, speaking quietly to the manager, his tone urgent enough to change the atmosphere instantly, and Sophie watches as the manager's expression shifts from anger to something closer to concern, his eyes darting toward her for a brief second before he nods and tells her to stay where she is, not to leave, not to touch anything, and then he disappears back toward the dining room, leaving her alone in the narrow space with nothing but the sound of her own breathing and the distant murmur of voices rising and falling beyond the door. And seconds stretch into minutes as her mind replays everything, the shimmer in the sauce, the hesitation, the moment she chose to act, and she presses her palms together, trying to steady herself, reminding herself why she did it, even as doubt continues to creep in at the edges, and then the door opens again, slower this time, and instead of the manager, it is him, Ethan Caldwell, stepping into the hallway with the same controlled presence he carried at the table, but now there is something different in his expression, something more focused, more deliberate, and Sophie straightens instinctively, her heart skipping as he stops a few feet away from her, studying her like he is trying to piece together a puzzle, and for a moment neither of them speaks, the silence thick but not empty, until he finally asks her, calmly, why she took the plate, not accusing, not yet, but searching, and Sophie swallows, forcing herself to meet his gaze as she explains, more clearly this time, that she thought something was wrong with the food, that she saw a reaction in the sauce she recognized, that she could not ignore it, and Ethan listens without interrupting, his eyes narrowing slightly as if weighing every word, and when she finishes, he does not respond right away, instead glancing back toward the dining room where the situation continues to unfold out of sight, and then he looks back at her and asks one simple question, what exactly did you see? And this time Sophie does not hesitate, describing the faint metallic sheen, the way it caught the light unnaturally, the same detail she had once learned to fear, and as she speaks, something shifts again, subtle but undeniable, because for the first time since this began, she sees it, not doubt, not anger, but recognition, a flicker of understanding in his eyes that tells her this is no longer just a misunderstanding, this is something real, something serious, and whatever happens next is not going to stay contained within the walls of a restaurant. Ethan does not speak for a few seconds after she finishes, and in that silence Sophie can feel the weight of his thoughts, precise and controlled, like everything about him, and then he turns slightly, pushing open the door just enough to glance back into the dining room, where the low hum of concern has grown into something sharper, more focused, and when he closes the door again his decision is already made. Because the next thing he does is pull out his phone and make a call, his voice calm but firm as he speaks to someone on the other end, giving instructions Sophie cannot fully hear but can clearly understand the tone of, efficient, decisive, used to being obeyed without question, and within less than a minute there is movement outside, footsteps, quiet urgency replacing the earlier chaos, and Sophie stands. They're unsure of where she fits in any of it, her hand still slightly shaking, her mind trying to keep up with how quickly everything has shifted from accusation to something much larger, and when Ethan ends the call he looks back at her, not with gratitude, not yet, but with a sharper kind of attention, as if she has become part of a situation he cannot ignore, and he asks her again, more directly this time, how she knows what she saw, and Sophie hesitates for only a second before answering. Telling him about her father, about the night everything changed, about how a single overlooked detail turned into something irreversible, and her voice stays steady even as the memory presses in, because she has lived with it long enough to speak about it without breaking, and Ethan listens without interrupting, his expression unreadable but his focus absolute, and when she finishes he gives a slight nod, not of sympathy but of acknowledgement, as if he understands the weight behind her words. Even if he does not say it out loud, and then the door opens again and this time it is not the manager but two men in dark suits who step inside, their presence quiet but unmistakably authoritative, and they exchange a brief look with Ethan before one of them speaks, confirming that the situation in the dining room has been contained, that the affected guest is being taken care of, that the staff is being questioned. And Sophie feels her stomach tighten at that word, questioned, because she knows exactly where suspicion tends to land in places like this, but before she can react Ethan speaks again, his tone leaving no room for interpretation as he says that Sophie is not to be treated as a suspect, that she is to remain here under his instruction, and the shift is immediate, the men nodding without hesitation, and for the first time since this began Sophie feels something she did not expect, not relief exactly, but a fragile sense of protection, as if the ground beneath her has stopped shifting, even if only temporarily. And one of the men asks Ethan if he believes this was intentional, and there is a brief pause before Ethan answers, his gaze flicking once more toward Sophie, then back to them, saying quietly that he does not deal in coincidences, and those words settle heavily in the air, changing everything again, because this is no longer just a mistake, no longer just a misunderstanding in a restaurant, this is something planned, something deliberate, and somehow, without meaning to, Sophie Bennett has stepped directly into the center of it. And as the realization takes hold she understands that whatever happens next will not only decide what becomes of this situation, it will decide what becomes of her. The hallway no longer feels like part of a restaurant, it feels like the edge of something much bigger, something controlled and deliberate, and Sophie stands there trying to steady her breathing as the two men in suits begin moving with quiet efficiency, one stepping out to coordinate with the staff while the other remains, watching everything with a calm that feels almost rehearsed, and Ethan turns slightly toward Sophie again. His presence still composed but now carrying a different kind of weight, as if he has already accepted that this situation is not over, not even close, and he asks her one more question, softer this time but somehow more serious, whether anyone else could have noticed what she saw, and Sophie shakes her head slowly, explaining that most people would not recognize it unless they had seen it before, unless they knew exactly what to look for, and as she says it, she realizes what that implies, that whoever placed it there expected no one to question it. Expected everything to go exactly as planned, and that thought sends a chill through her that has nothing to do with the temperature of the room, and before she can say anything else, the manager reappears, his earlier anger gone, replaced by something closer to anxiety as he speaks quickly, explaining that the kitchen staff has been accounted for, that no one is admitting to any mistake, that the ingredients came from their usual suppliers. And Sophie watches as Ethan listens without interrupting, his expression tightening just slightly, not in panic but in calculation, and when the manager finishes, Ethan asks a simple question that seems to cut through everything, who had access to the plate between preparation and service, and the manager hesitates, listing off names, procedures, the normal chain of handling, but even as he speaks it becomes clear that there are gaps, small moments where oversight becomes assumption, where trust replaces verification, and Sophie feels a quiet realization settle in, because this is not just about one dish, this is about a system that can be used if someone knows how to move through it, and Ethan seems to reach the same conclusion at the same time, because he nods once, slowly, and then tells the manager to cooperate fully with his team, that every detail matters, that nothing is too small to overlook, and there is no argument, no resistance, only a quick agreement before the manager steps away again, leaving the three of them in the narrow space, and for a moment there is a pause, a rare stillness in the middle of everything. And Sophie becomes aware of how close she is standing to Ethan, how different his world is from hers, and yet somehow she is now part of it, whether she intended to be or not. And then he speaks again, his voice quieter, more direct, telling her that what she did tonight was not just instinct, it was intervention, and that without it the outcome could have been very different. And Sophie does not know how to respond to that, because the words feel heavier than any thank you, heavier than anything she expected. And she shifts slightly, her fingers tightening against the fabric of her uniform as she says she was just trying to do the right thing. And Ethan studies her for a moment longer, as if deciding something, and then he tells her she is not leaving yet, that he needs her to walk through everything she saw again, every detail, no matter how small, because in situations like this, the smallest detail is often the one that matters most. And as Sophie nods slowly, realizing she is now being asked to stay, to help, to become part of whatever comes next, she understands that this night did not end when she stepped into that hallway. It only just began, and somewhere beyond the door, beyond the controlled movement of staff and security, something unresolved is still waiting, something that has not yet revealed itself, and for reasons she cannot fully explain, she knows she is going to be right there when it does. They move to a quieter corner of the hallway, away from the passing staff and the constant motion, and for the first time since everything started, Sophie is asked to slow down, to walk through the moment step by step, and Ethan listens with an intensity that makes it impossible for her to leave anything out, his attention fixed on her words as if each detail could shift the entire direction of what is happening. And she begins from the beginning, describing the tray, the order ticket, the way the plate looked perfectly normal at first glance, the way the sauce caught the candlelight just slightly differently than it should have, and as she speaks she finds herself remembering more, small things she had not noticed in the moment, like how the plate felt slightly warmer than the others she had carried that night, or how the garnish had been placed just a little off-center compared to the usual presentation, and each detail seems to matter more than it should, because Ethan does not dismiss any of it, instead asking precise questions, narrowing the timeline, identifying the exact window between the kitchen and the table, and when she finishes he nods slowly, processing everything, and then he asks her something unexpected, whether she noticed anyone near the service station who did not belong, and Sophie hesitates, her brow tightening slightly as she searches her memory, because there had been so many people moving through the space, servers, runners, staff shifting between tables, but then something surfaces, something small but distinct, a man she did not recognize, standing too still near the service corridor, not dressed like staff, not seated like a guest, just watching, and she describes him carefully, the neutral suit, the way he avoided eye contact, the fact that he left just before she picked up the tray, and as she speaks Ethan's expression changes again, subtle but clear, as if that single detail aligns with something he already suspected, and he exchanges a quick look with one of the men in suits, who immediately steps aside to relay the description, his voice low but urgent as he speaks into a device clipped to his jacket, and the pace shifts again, faster now, more focused, as if the search has finally narrowed, and Sophie feels it, the transition from uncertainty to direction, and it makes everything feel more real, more dangerous in a way she cannot fully define, and she wraps her arms lightly around herself without realizing it, grounding herself as she watches the quiet coordination unfold, and then Ethan turns back to her, his voice lower now, more personal as he asks if she understands what this means, and she nods slowly, because she does, even if she does not want to. It means someone planned this, someone expected him to be there, expected the system to work in their favor, and it means that her decision interrupted something that was meant to happen, and that thought settles heavily in her chest, because it also means whoever set this in motion may not be finished, and Ethan seems to read that same realization in her expression, because he tells her calmly that she did exactly what most people would not have done, that she acted when it mattered, and for a moment the noise of everything else fades, leaving just that statement hanging between them, not dramatic, not exaggerated, but real, and Sophie exhales slowly, feeling the weight of it, because she knows he is right. And yet that truth comes with consequences she is only beginning to understand, and as the man in the suit returns with a quiet update, indicating that someone matching the description was seen leaving through a side exit minutes earlier, the situation shifts once again, no longer contained, no longer abstract, but moving outward, beyond the walls of the restaurant, and Sophie realizes that whatever happens next is not just about what already occurred, it is about what is still in motion, and somehow, without meaning to, she has become part of that story. The update lands quietly, but it changes everything, because now there is a direction, a person, a thread to follow, and Sophie feels the shift immediately as the man in the suit speaks in low, precise terms about camera footage, exit points, timestamps that narrow the window down to minutes, and Ethan listens without interruption, his posture still composed but his attention sharpened into something almost tangible, and when the report ends he nods once, already thinking ahead, already moving beyond what just happened into what comes next, and then he turns back to Sophie, studying her again, but this time there is something different in his gaze. Not just evaluation but recognition, as if he has made a decision about her role in all of this, and he asks her a question she does not expect, whether she is willing to help him further, and the words catch her off guard because she had assumed her part in this would end the moment she explained what she saw, that she would be sent home, or dismissed, or simply forgotten once the situation was under control, but instead she finds herself standing in front of a man whose world she does not belong to, being asked to step deeper into it, and for a moment she hesitates, not because she does not want to help, but because she understands what that means. It means involvement, attention, risk in ways she has never experienced before, and Ethan does not rush her answer, he simply waits, his calm presence making the silence feel intentional rather than uncomfortable, and Sophie takes a slow breath, grounding herself, remembering the moment at the table, the decision she made without thinking. And she realizes this is no different, it is still about choosing what is right over what is easy, and she nods, her voice steady as she says yes, she will help, and something in Ethan's expression shifts again, subtle but clear, as if her answer confirms something he already believed, and he gives a slight nod in return, acknowledging her decision without overplaying it, and then he begins outlining what he needs, simple things at first, her recollection of the layout, the timing of the service, any pattern she might have noticed during her shifts that could point to access or opportunity, and as he speaks Sophie finds herself stepping into the role without realizing it, her earlier fear replaced by a focused clarity, because this is something she understands, not the corporate world, not the scale of his influence, but the rhythm of a restaurant, the flow of people and movement and unnoticed moments where things can change, and as she describes it, mapping it out in real time, Ethan listens closely, occasionally asking a question that sharpens the picture further, and together they begin to build something out of fragments, a clearer sense of how someone could have moved through the system without being noticed, and as that understanding grows, so does the realization that this was not random, not rushed, but planned with precision, and that thought lingers heavily between them, because it means whoever is behind it is still out there, still capable of trying again, and as if to confirm that, the man in the suit steps back in once more, his voice even but carrying a quiet urgency as he informs Ethan that the individual seen leaving has not yet been located, that the trail goes cold just beyond the building, and for a moment the space feels smaller, tighter, as the implications settle in, and Sophie feels a familiar tension return, not panic, but awareness, because this is no longer contained, it is moving beyond their control, and she glances at Ethan, expecting frustration, or anger, but instead she sees something else entirely, determination, calm and unwavering, the kind that does not react but adapts. And when he speaks again his voice is steady, already shifting the focus forward, saying that if the first attempt failed, there may be another, and that changes the stakes completely, because now it is not just about understanding what happened, it is about anticipating what comes next, and as Sophie stands there, realizing how far she has already stepped into this world, she understands that there is no going back to being just a waitress at the edge of someone else's story, not anymore, because now she is part of it, and whatever happens next is going to involve her whether she is ready or not. The realization settles in quietly but firmly, shaping the air around them as Ethan's words linger, because if there is another attempt, then waiting is no longer an option, and Sophie can feel the shift in pace even before anything is said, the energy tightening, focusing, turning from reaction into intention, and Ethan moves first, stepping closer to the hallway entrance and looking back toward the dining room where the atmosphere is beginning to normalize, guests returning to conversations, staff smoothing over the disruption, the illusion of control carefully rebuilt, but beneath it something remains unsettled, something unfinished. And when he turns back to Sophie his voice is calm but decisive as he explains that the safest place to act is often where people assume nothing will happen twice, and that means staying, observing, letting the situation reveal itself rather than chasing shadows outside, and Sophie listens, her mind catching up to the strategy, because it makes sense in a way that feels both logical and risky at the same time, and she nods slowly, understanding that this is no longer about what already happened but about what could happen next, and as if on cue one of the suited men steps forward, quietly confirming that the dining room has been reset, that service has resumed, that no further irregularities have been reported, and for a moment everything feels almost normal again. But Sophie knows better now. She can feel it in the way Ethan remains still for a second longer than necessary, in the way his eyes scan not just the room but the patterns within it, the movement, the timing, the spaces where someone could slip through unnoticed, and then he looks at her and says something that makes her chest tighten slightly. He asks her to go back out there, not as a suspect, not even as staff under scrutiny, but as the one person who has already proven she notices what others miss, and the request lands with quiet weight, because it is simple on the surface but carries everything underneath, and Sophie takes a breath, steadying herself. Because stepping back into that room now feels completely different from before. She is no longer just serving tables, she is watching, listening, aware in a way she has never been, and she nods again, her voice low but certain as she agrees, and together they step back through the door, the warm light of the dining room washing over them again as the familiar sounds return, the clinking glasses, the soft music, the illusion of calm. But Sophie's perspective has shifted entirely. Every movement now stands out, every detail sharper, more defined, and she moves through the space with controlled focus, her eye scanning the service stations, the entry points, the guests who linger just a second too long, the staff who move just slightly out of rhythm. And for a while nothing happens, the minutes passing in a careful balance between normalcy and tension, until something catches her attention again, not dramatic, not obvious, but just enough to stand out, a plate being set down at a nearby table, not Ethan's this time but close enough to matter, and for a split second she notices the same faint inconsistency, the same subtle detail that does not belong, and her heart skips as the realization hits, not once, but again, and she turns instinctively, her gaze locking across the room with Ethan's, and in that silent exchange everything is understood, because this is not over, not even close, and whatever is unfolding has just begun its second move. The moment stretches thinner than breath as Sophie moves without hesitation, her body reacting before her thoughts can fully catch up, weaving through the tables with practiced ease that now carries a different kind of urgency, and she reaches the nearby table just as the guest begins to lift his fork, her hand steady as she intercepts the plate with a calm that surprises even herself, offering a quick apology about a minor mix-up in the order, her voice controlled enough to avoid drawing attention while her pulse races beneath the surface, and this time the transition is smoother, quieter, because she knows exactly what she is looking for, the same faint shimmer, the same detail that does not belong, and as she lifts the plate away she feels the confirmation settle in, solid and undeniable, and across the room Ethan is already moving, not rushed, not alarmed, but deliberate, his presence cutting through the space as he approaches, his attention fixed on the situation without disrupting the fragile normalcy around them, and within seconds the suited men shift positions as well, subtle adjustments that close off exits without making a scene, turning the entire restaurant into a controlled environment without most guests even realizing it, and Sophie steps back slightly as Ethan reaches her, his gaze dropping briefly to the plate in her hands before returning to her face, and this time there is no question in his expression, only certainty, because whatever doubt existed before is gone, replaced by the clear understanding that this is not coincidence, this is repetition, and he gives a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement that she was right again, and that acknowledgement carries more weight than any words, and then everything begins to move at once, quiet instructions given, staff redirected, the flow of the room subtly altered as attention shifts toward the service corridor where the second plate originated. And Sophie watches as one of the suited men speaks into his device, coordinating with unseen teams beyond the room, narrowing the window once more, tracing the path back through the system they had already begun to understand, and within minutes the pattern reveals itself, not through chaos but through precision, a gap identified, a moment where someone stepped in and out unnoticed, and this time the response is ready, faster, tighter, closing in before the opportunity can disappear again, and Sophie feels the shift in control, the way the balance tilts away from whoever set this in motion and back toward the people standing here now, and as the situation stabilizes, Ethan turns to her once more, his voice lower than before but carrying a quiet clarity as he tells her that she did not just intervene, she prevented something from happening twice, and Sophie exhales slowly, the weight of everything finally catching up to her, because the fear, the doubt, the uncertainty, all of it has led to this moment where her instincts proved not just right, but essential, and for a brief second the noise of the room fades again, leaving only that understanding between them, and then Ethan adds something she does not expect, something that shifts everything one last time. He tells her that someone like her does not belong at the edge of a system that depends on awareness, that she belongs at the center of it, and Sophie looks at him, unsure at first what he means, until he makes it clear, offering her a place within his world, not as a favor, not as a reward, but as recognition of what she has already shown, and the words settle slowly, reshaping everything she thought this night would be, because she came here expecting to work a shift and survive another day, and instead she stands at the threshold of something entirely different, something she never planned for, and as she takes a breath, looking around the room that now feels smaller than it did before, she realizes that the moment she chose to act, everything changed, not just for him, but for her too, and whatever comes next, it will not be the life she walked in with, but something entirely new.